I now give the floor to His Excellency Mahamoud Ali Youssouf, Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Government Spokesperson of Djibouti.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Excellences, Monsieur le Président.
Excellencies, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to first and foremost express my heartfelt congratulations to you on your election at the helm of the General Assembly and express to you our gratitude to your predecessor for their work. We meet at a time when the consequences of many crises, be they economic, security, or climate in nature, continue to hit our countries. Poverty persists and is worsening in some places in the world, and environmental disasters are proliferating, bringing innumerable victims in their wake. We would reiterate our condolences to the governments of our sister nations, Kingdom of Morocco and Libya, and we reaffirm to them our full solidarity. While we recognize the promise of technological innovation, at the same time, we have to also understand the fears, the legitimate fears, that they could be used in a destructive manner. And while we need to meet these challenges together, that requires more confidence, more international cooperation, and more solidarity, and accelerating action towards the Sustainable Development Goals of the Agenda 2030, peace, prosperity, progress, and sustainability for all. While this is a noble goal, we need to tacitly recognize here that the trajectory we're on right now is going in the opposite direction. The lack of trust and mutual suspicion are omnipresent and impact negatively international cooperation. The Secretary General called for inclusive multilateralism and integrated multilateralism, and what is opposing this is the tendency to group together in clubs. This is called mini-lateralism by some analysts, and this is eroding confidence, something that has not happened overnight. The result is slow deterioration and implacable resistance to change of world institutions that were created after the Second World War, due to inequality, which is deepening and fossilizing, as well as geopolitical competition, which is worsening in recent years. And in our view, however, this is not irreversible. It's imperative, therefore, that we invest massively in multilateral efforts to build confidence and solidarity among states. And at the very heart of this effort must be the United Nations. Together, we can imagine a multilateral system that would take into account geopolitical realities of the time, including proliferation of these groups, but not in one of institution, but rather reinforce complementarity with close cooperation, without reserve or hesitation, where we could commit together to strengthening strong links of solidarity. We must learn to trust ourselves. We need to work together to build a reformed multilateral system that's more fair and representative, where everyone would find their place, the powerful and the less powerful alike. And together, we must send a clear, unequivocal message that we are determined to build a robust organization together that would respond in a credible manner to the huge challenges of the moment. It's urgency must guide our action, and delays in implementing the SDGs is overwhelming for the credibility of the system. We're about halfway from where we need to be and far from reaching those objectives. And according to some estimations, at the current pace and with the current volume of finance, if that remains unchanged, it will take another 63 years to get to our goal. Many commitments have been undertaken since Addis Ababa and the adoption of the 2030 Agenda. And yet, unfortunately, many countries are in a worse situation now and have more needs now than they did in the past decade. And to that end, the IMF declared that a third of the world economies will be in recession this year. And for the first time, the UNDP noted that the Human Development Index is falling in 9 out of 10 countries. In this regard, our country remains fully committed to, and in a constructive manner, intergovernmental negotiations for the Summit of the Future that should accelerate the implementation of the 2030 Agenda and sustainable development. Moreover, it's important to underscore the vital importance of reforming the international financial architecture and implementing measures beyond the GDP so that we can fill the gaps in financing for development. The increasing increasing vulnerability of countries that are developing in the area of debt requires additional urgent measures to reform the international debt architecture. Indeed, the high cost of loans combined with public revenues which are falling prevents a lot of developing countries and the least advanced from investing in SDGs and increases the risk of defaulting on their debt payments. We need to further mobilize with a view to achieving our objectives between now and 2030, and this plan represents hope for humanity. We must not give in to the temptation to give up. However, we are also aware of the difficulties before us, which are real, but they're not insurmountable. The means to achieve our goals have been clearly set forth in the SDG stimulus package of the Secretary General. Urgent action has been identified, such as improving sustainability of the debt, reform of multilateral development banks, the support of which is crucial in order to increase financing for development objectives for sustainable development, and strengthening the world financial security net. Reducing systemic risk is also important and weighs on the financial stability system and the international monetary system, and strengthening world governance and consistency of policies are the very foundation of salvaging this SDGs. The Secretary General's salvaging plan has not been heard enough to date, but needs to be taken into account more in future discussions around reform of the international financial architecture. And in this regard, we are encouraged by statements made in support of this during the general debate. Reforming the international financial architecture, especially the IMF and the World Bank, cannot wait. We need to strengthen participation of developing countries, especially in taking decisions at the international economic level, and with regard to establishing a new norms so that we can adapt to the changes of the world economy. We also need to work together to accelerate the Bretton Woods moment that the Secretary General referred to earlier. The dialogue needs to be intensified around reforming the financial architecture and multilateral financial institutions. And of course, the United Nations plays a key role in the mandate of each organization. Mr. President and Secretary General, despite the deterioration of the world economic situation, Djibouti has worked unwaveringly to achieve the SDGs and has made notable progress in a number of areas, such as reducing malnutrition and undernutrition, and has effectively managed the pandemic. Djibouti integrated the SDGs in our national development plans and in our strategies, such as the 2035 Djibouti Vision. Also, our government took measures to align its policies and programs with the goals and indicators of the SDGs. We further identified priority areas that correspond to specific SDGs, such as poverty reduction, access to potable water and sanitation, as well as economic growth which is sustainable. Indeed, our country has confronted a number of challenges related to poverty, unemployment, and development of infrastructure, which are at the very heart of the SDGs. Moreover, we managed to work together with international organizations, donors, and other countries to mobilize resources and experts with a view to implementing the SDGs. And these partnerships contribute to strengthening support for achieving our goals. We have also worked to improve our infrastructure for data and to measure and take into account the SDG indicators. Our country is in a region which is vulnerable to climate change, and that's why we have undertaken significant efforts in the area of climate action in keeping with SDG 13, Action for Climate. These efforts include renewable energy projects and adaptation measures. In addition to the large-scale projects in the area of geothermal energy, Djibouti is proud to report to its friend nations that are present here today that we also inaugurated a wind park, the first one, which will provide 60 megawatts of clean energy. This project was made possible due to a public-private partnership, and additional capacity of 45 megawatts of renewable energy is expected through a consortium of investors with the participation of the Port Authority and tax-free zones and the Sovereign Fund of Djibouti. The project will be the first international investment project of note in the energy sector in Djibouti. It's the first independent producer of electricity and power in the country, and will serve as a model for future private investment, with this one involving some $122 million. The healthcare system and education are also priorities for our country, and we are making efforts to improve services for healthcare and education opportunities, especially in the more remote areas. Development of infrastructure is also crucial for economic growth and durability, and Djibouti has invested in infrastructure for transport and to strengthen regional connectivity and trade with a view to becoming an international logistical and regional hub. Finally, in the area of peace and security, Djibouti has played a key role in peacekeeping and peace maintenance efforts regionally and seeks to maintain stability throughout the Horn of Africa. All of these commitments undertaken towards achieving the SDGs reflect our efforts and my country's efforts to meet pressing challenges and improve the well-being of our people while also contributing to sustainable development of the world. Sir, climate change remains an existential threat for our countries. It is particularly true in the Horn of Africa, but elsewhere in the world as well. The earthquake that led to the loss of several thousand lives in Morocco, as well as the enormous amount of desolation caused by Hurricane Daniel, are there as reminders for us all. Hence, the urgency of honoring the commitments undertaken at the Paris Agreements. If nothing is done, the negative impact of climate change will continue to lead to significant disturbance, including the multiplication, many more extreme weather events, rarefaction of resources, a rising sea level, and an increase in the number of people who are displaced, exacerbation of hunger and poverty. We are deeply disappointed that the promise of mobilize $100 billion per year was never kept, and we call on countries, developed countries, to keep their pledges. We're very pleased with the crucial decision that was taken during COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh to create a fund for loss and damage. And we call for authorization of this swiftly and have the wish that the recommendations of the Committee on Transition for how this fund would work their recommendations will be adopted during COP28 that will be held soon in the UAE. Sir, we're very encouraged by the determination of the Somalian government to implement key national priorities based on dialogue, including federal fiscal measures and amendments to the national security architecture. We urge them to continue the dialogue, especially with regard to revising the Constitution and all other pending matters. The battle waged to liberate the Somalian territory from the al-Shabaab forces is a vital one. Mobilization of all Somalian forces under the stewardship of President Hassan Sheikh deserves to be supported without reserve until the goal is achieved. However, we would express our fear that the progress achieved on one front might be called into question by a fall-off in the number of soldiers of the ATMIS, and we here applaud the courage and self-sacrifice of those soldiers. We understand the constraints that are linked to available financial resources, and the consequences of our decisions need to be carefully considered. Somalia is at a critical stage and needs a maximum amount of support commensurate with what weighs on it. We remain very concerned by the deterioration of the security situation in Sudan and call for a quick ceasefire and immediate resumption of negotiations to stop hostilities and for political negotiations to find a way out of the crisis. Djibouti, as current president of IGAD and under the leadership of President Ismail Omar Guelleh, is determined to work for sustainable peace in this sister nation with whom we share political, historical, and cultural close ties. In South Sudan, we are very pleased with the signature of the 2018 revitalized peace agreement and call for accelerated implementation of the provisions of the agreement, which have been suspended after the transition period. In neighboring Yemen, we call on the Security Council members for a sustainable way out of this crisis and conclusion of an inclusive peace agreement. We're very pleased also with the transfer of oil for the super oil tanker, which has been decomposing along the Red Sea in Yemen, and to bring that towards a new ship. The Republic of Djibouti is committed to working with the international community to find a coordinated solution to this issue. If our region and the world had not acted quickly, the coast of the Horn of Africa and the Arab Peninsula would have been completely polluted, exposing communities that live there to deadly toxins and contaminating all the drinkable water throughout the region. Navigation through the Suez Canal would have been perturbed, It would have been interrupting, therefore, the transport of food, fuel, and vital supplies, which would have exacerbated humanitarian conditions, which are already disastrous in Yemen. In addition to the principle of the base serving as coordination for delicate activities, the Republic of Djibouti also serves the United Nations in the context of rescue operations for the FSO SAFER and the platform for securing and storing oil and more than 1 million barrels of it, which were then transferred from the boat to a cistern called the Nautica. Through this cooperation, Djibouti and the United Nations spared the region an environmental disaster, which would have been very damaging to the environment, the economy, and the health of all the peoples that live along the Red Sea. Also, the cost of cleaning was estimated $20 billion if that crisis had not been avoided. At this point in time, the world is confronted with many urgent crises, and this is a positive point and an example of a model of international cooperation. Now we are at the point of finishing the removal of the SAFER from the Red Sea. We're very seriously concerned at this point by the escalation of violence and resumption of hostilities in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and we're concerned by Israel's continued illegal construction and illegal expansion of settlements. Resuming hostility and continuing the settlement activities is endangering the viability of a two-state solution. And given increasing despair and increasing uncertainty, the absence of a political horizon, all of this means that we must take action immediately. The initiative for revitalizing the peace plan, led jointly by Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, the League of Arab States, and the European Union, deserves our full support. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, we have said it on a number of occasions from this rostrum, and we reiterate it again today. We are full of peace and remain entirely available to put an end to the process of normalization with Eritrea and find a sustainable, peaceful settlement to the border dispute. To conclude, I wish to once again urge member nations of the United Nations to build a more secure and prosperous future together, a future with more solidarity where war, hunger, and poverty are excluded. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Government Spokesperson of Djibouti. I now give